Welcome everyone to the Water, Waste and Energy Committee meeting 808, Wednesday the 8th of September. We have a full contingent of committee and we welcome Councillor Owen Jones and Councillor Patterson as guests. We have only one starred item on the agenda, but we usually do star the reports, as financial reports. Has anyone got any questions on any of the report items? If not, we can star them. If everyone's in agreement? Yep. 6.1 to 6.7, the financial reports, unless anyone wants to keep something unstarred on one of those items? No? Okay. Okay. We've got confirmation of no leave of absence. Everyone's here. Councillor McDonald, you're with us?
I am.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
We do have a correction on the minutes and Rebecca's just going to put that on the screen. On the change recommendation on 6.1, in the minutes it said I was the only one who voted for it, but I did have one other. It was Councillor McDonald voted for it as well, so we'll make that change. I don't want to be left out to dry. So if someone would like to move the confirmation of minutes with that correction. Councillor Tozer, and seconded Councillor Belden-Lumsden. Oh, it's just the confirmation of minutes with the correction that on the... No, you're voting... That was the change recommendation, 6.1. That's the change in the minutes. Yeah, 6.1. Oh, Rebecca, did you?
So I've changed the recommendation to read that the minutes be with the following adjustments to the change recommendation voting.
Change recommendation of item
6.1. Yeah. All good? Okay. All those in favour of confirmation minutes? That's carried. Thank you. And someone like to move the start items? Councillor Peter Young and seconded Councillor Tozer. All those in favour? Thank you. We do have a closed item, 7.1, but we do have a presentation from SEQ Water. So we might do that while we're in open and then we'll go into close after that presentation, if that's okay with everyone. Yep. Thanks, Director.
Thanks through you, Madam Chair. I'd like to call out Ross Muir from SEQ Water and Carly Freeman, who will join him. Ross will give us a presentation on an update of the drought status and what's happening with water in southeast Queensland, and as I say, Carly and Ross will do a tag team throughout the presentation of how we're working together on these challenging times. So welcome, Ross.
Thanks very much, Paul, and good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here this morning. As Paul said, we're here at the invitation of Gold Coast to really talk through about the drought response and the situation we are currently facing in terms of drought leading into summer. And we've been doing these briefings across southeast Queensland really just to make sure that local governments understand particularly where the situation's at and the plans that we have going forward. So I'll run through this. There's time for questions at the end, but please, if there's a particular question you have as I go through, by all means feel free to ask. I'd just like to start off by acknowledging the work that Gold Coast Water and Waste are already doing in the region towards a sustainable water future. There's been some really great achievements and some work that's still in play that we particularly would like to acknowledge, including making better use of recycled water locally. Smart meters obviously are a great way to inform residents about or or say large industrial users about potential leaks and things like that, so they can manage their water use better, and even providing that better information through a portal, which is happening, and being just attentive to leaks and other issues. So look, certainly from our point of view, they're great initiatives, and we'd really like to acknowledge that at the start of this presentation. So as a region, and it's not just our challenges, I guess, it's as a region and sustaining a water supply. What are the challenges that we face? And I'll touch on these in a second, but some of you may have heard the Infrastructure Australia released a report earlier in the week, which talked about plan for reform and the National Infrastructure Plan. And not surprisingly, one of the big focuses in that plan was around water supply and water security. And the sorts of things that Infrastructure Australia were calling out, which really resonate, I think, for all of us, were around climate change, population growth, and really how that impacts on our future water, not only from a demand point of view, but from a water supply point of view, and particularly how we think about the traditional sources of supply we've had, particularly dams, and the need to diversify nationally our water sources, so that we don't just have, and we aren't at the mercy of the climate, which we know is getting more extreme. So I think that really paints a nice broad national picture, and really when we drill down to our region, exactly the same issues we're facing here. So we know that the population's growing regionally, and Gold Coast is absolutely no exception to that. And I guess it's interesting to also note that whilst the population's growing, the amount of water that each household or individual is using is still very low compared to before the Millennium Drought, when we had restrictions. So in fact, before the Millennium Drought, if I can say sort of in the early 2000s, we used to have to make around 1,000 megalitres a day, okay, to supply Southeast Queensland. There's now well over 1 million more people in the region, and we're only now returning to that 1,000 megalitres a day type production number. So that demand reduction that we've achieved through the Millennium Drought through various measures, and notwithstanding that they're ongoing, like the sort of work that you guys are doing, has really bought us some significant amount of time and really improved our water security situation overall. So that's great to see, but that means that we've now got to think about the future, obviously, in terms of meeting that population growth going forward. Climate uncertainty is not a surprise. What I would say is we have seen that play out really in the last few years. We think about the rain and the inflows we've had regionally. Now Hinds Dam has been a great performer, as has some of the Sunshine Coast dams. We've had good coastal rain, and we've had extended periods of rainfall. But when we go to Wivenhoe Dam, even though there has been significant rain over Wivenhoe and Somerset Dam, it's really been a function of the dry climate that we've had that's really dried those catchments up, and has soaked up that water before it's hit those dams. So despite having a pretty wet summer last year, we only got a relatively small amount of water into those dams, and I think in part that's due to drying climate and the effect that it has on the runoff. We've also saw in 2019, when we had a particularly hot period, evaporation rates were extraordinary, and not only affected our dam supplies, but also you can imagine people have to fill up pools and whatnot, so demand goes up as well. So climate uncertain, I guess what the uncertainty is, the extent of the impact. We know that it is having an impact though, and that needs to be part of our planning. The water grid limitations for us, it's really about making the best of the assets that we have. So we've got an interconnected water grid in Southeast Queensland. It's a regional approach to managing urban water supply, and it's really no different to other Australian capital cities, where there's a regional approach to supplying those metropolitan areas in and around Sydney, Melbourne, etc., etc. So we face the same issues as they face around making the best, optimising the best use of the different water sources we have around that region, and to make sure we've got getting a best overall outcome for the area. So that's it's a challenge, but also an opportunity, I think, for us that we see. And of course, we are seeing, and you can't see the detail there, but because we have such a secure water supply in Southeast Queensland, there are inevitably demands outside the strict boundaries of our region including Toowoomba, and even out to the Southern Downs and Warwick now are starting to look to South East Queensland to help support their water security. So again, it goes to that regional approach and really making the best use of the assets that we've got to support those areas, but we need to factor that into our planning. So what has the water grid supply level done over the last few years? So if we go back to probably, 6 years ago, the grid levels were pretty full. We've seen a steady rate of decline over that time. So I'll talk you through the two lines on this graph. The first line is I'll focus on the blue line to start with, and that is what water storage is in South East Queensland. If you imagine back in 2015, you had the exact same conditions as the Millennium Drought, but you overlay on that the additional infrastructure that we have today around the Dugan desal plant, etc., etc. This is what would have happened over the Millennium Drought, and what that tells us is the water grid storage level overall wouldn't have got below 40%. In contrast, at the depths of the drought, we saw Wivenhoe, well below 20%, and obviously some concerning levels at the different dams around the area. So the blue line's really there to show that the investment that we've made, and if we follow our drought response plan, it's still a very secure water supply. Overlaid on that is the orange line, which that shows what the grids has actually happened over the last 6 years. And you can see there it doesn't exactly follow the Millennium Drought, but the trend is very similar, right? We're actually on that type of trajectory as we speak. So, and if we're currently at just over 57% across the whole grid. If we were to continue, we kind of use 2019 as our sort of worst case planning forecast to say, okay, well, what should we be planning for? How soon could the next things happen? We could be down to 50% before summer, or I guess at the start of summer in December. So that's a planning date that we use, and I'll talk about what that means in terms of the next round of actions a bit later through. Of course, yeah.
So on that, I'm just trying to get my head around this blue thing. The blue line is this modelling had we not made any change. Is that?
The blue line says if at 2015, when you had in place all the extra water supply assets that we have now,
Yes.
and the demand management plans we have in place now, and we followed the drought plan, if in 2015 you had exactly the same situation as the Millennium Drought, so you had the same rainfall and inflows, what would the grid storages have looked like? And this tells us that they wouldn't have got, in that hypothetical model situation, they wouldn't have got less than 40% because we would have been well protected against the Millennium Drought, if you like.
Right, but this yellow line is the actual storage levels that we had based on the infrastructure that was available to us to use at the time.
That's right, yeah.
So one of the questions that people ask me in my community, and I don't quite know how to answer it, is if we've got a desalination plant that can turn salt water into fresh water, how come the grid can't utilise that capability to lift the total capacity?
And that's a great question. And it's part
I
of
don't know. I wasn't trying to oversimplify it, but it just if we've got a desal, how come we can't just fill up the dams with ocean water?
Exactly, and that's we get asked that all the time too, and it's a legitimate question, right? So part of it goes back to the discussion before about making the most of what we've got and the limitations we have around the grid. So if I can put it in context, the desal plant can make a bit over 100 megalitres per day.
Okay.
Total South East Queensland demand's up towards 800 to 1,000 megalitres per day.
Right.
So it can produce about 10% of the total demand.
Yes.
And then we also have capacity limitations around how we can, if we combine the desal water plus using Hinds Dam and Mollendina and Mudgeeraba, there's a capacity limitation in the pipeline that gets the water in towards Brisbane, around 90 megalitres per day. So if we wanted to, we could build a whole series of desal plants and it just totally take everybody off dam water. That would be incredibly expensive and whatnot. But what the desal plant does do, it actually slows the rate of decline that you see on that orange line. That orange line would have been faster in terms of its rate of decline, and we'd be in a worse situation today if not for us running the desal plant over the last 18 months or so.
So because the desal plant can only produce 100 megalitres a day and we can only move 90 megalitres a day north into the grid network, the desal plant can really only serve the Gold Coast needs as opposed to the rest of the grid needs.
Oh, no, it can help. It offsets what we would take out of Ivanhoe by 90 megalitres a day, basically.
Yeah.
So it does really help. No, it makes a big
It
difference.
helps, but there's no way it could it can't lift capacity, it can only mitigate usage, really.
Yeah, let's just turn down what the amount of water we take out of Ivanhoe and North Pine, and that helps. It's a big help.
And is there any statewide consideration of a more northern desal project?
So we are in the middle of producing our next sort of 30-year plan.
Yes.
So that's due to come out in March next year.
Yeah.
And the last time, when we did this last time in 2017, we foreshadowed the need for a new water source in the northern part of the region towards the Sunshine Coast. And there's going to have to be an options process to look at that, but desal is among the options, as well as potentially other storage and other options up there. So that's what that last round of planning told us. We probably need to do something on the Sunshine Coast. It could be a desal plant. It could be something different. We're just refreshing that planning at the moment just to see if that needs to change.
So something different being the use of recycled water?
From our point of view, all options are on the table in terms of, in terms of it could be recycled water if that stacks up as terms of meeting all the criteria that we need. So.
Okay, thank you.
Just to give you a sense of relative water consumption across the region, so probably what stands out there is over the last month, we've had pretty good results overall across the region in terms of water demand. We're currently targeting about 150 litres per person per day, and we managed to achieve that close to that 155 over August. There is regional variation, right? So that's a regional average. And Redland does tend to be the highest demand area. It's a very small part of our supply, but it does tend to be the highest demand area. And really the two coastal areas tend to be the sort of next in line in terms of total water demand, so which really plays out on those numbers there between Gold Coast in the grey and Unity Water, which is the Sunshine Coast in the blue. So, sorry. Yeah, it's really around residential.
High water use industries in those two local government areas?
It wouldn't be because of that. In fact, the big water use industries are actually in urban utilities footprint. Yeah.
There you go. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm in your hands there.
Long showers and holidays. Good.
That's right.
Gracious.
My parents live in Noosa, and that's what they blame the Noosa numbers on. Yeah, the Victorians. Sorry.
So with the persons per day, how is that calculated? Is that based on population, resident population, or is that visitors as well?
Look, I'd have to take that one on notice precisely how they're taken into account, but there is an allowance for visitors, but I'm not sure how precise that is seasonally. So I'd have to take that one on notice. Yeah. So given, as I mentioned before, drought, our overall water grid storages are just below 58%, so that sort of plays into our drought response program. And so when we to do our 30-year plan, which we did last in 2017, we set out what's the drought response plan for the region. It's reasonably simple, and it's basically taking a series of escalating measures as dam levels reduce, and really, I'll focus there on at 70%. We really enter a drought readiness phase, and that was in about March 2019 that we kicked off, and that was doing some of the basic things like mobilising even ourselves to get ready for drought response, starting to talk to yourselves about, okay, we need to start thinking about getting ready for drought response, looking at our assets, what we need to do, and also providing some community messaging around, water levels are starting to get scarce. So that's sort of been and gone, and we hit the 60% target. We've actually touched on that a few times, but most recently in June this year, we sort of crossed that 60% threshold, and that's when we really target, as I mentioned before, that 150 litres per person per day regionally for demand and running, and that's a voluntary measures, but it's about informing the community and really asking them to step up and start to save water. So we run some campaigns. We also join with your council as well as the other water service providers who have that close connection with your consumers about providing water saving tips and using those communication channels. At 60%, we also, as we mentioned before, ramp up production of the desal plant. So it's been running up to 100%. We've had things like planned shutdowns and things like that in between, but it's been running pretty much flat out going back to June and even a little bit before that actually, and which has been a great contributor. And at 60%, that's also the trigger upon which we consider recommissioning the Western Corridor Recycled Water Scheme. So this was a recycled water scheme built in the Millennium Drought that until I think in 2013 it was sort of decommissioned and just put in a state of readiness. Since that time, we've actually recommissioned a small part of the scheme, and we've used that. We did that a couple of years ago. We've used that to supply industry, and we're currently using that to offset demand from power stations, so Swanbank Power Station, and believe it or not, Tarong Power Station up in the Burnett actually takes water out of Ivanhoe Dam when their own dam gets low. So we're using that to offset. In total terms, the Western Corridor scheme can actually produce about 180 megalitres per day. So that's close enough to 20%, 25% of the region's water supply. So it's a big asset and it's a big part of the drought response. More recently, so we had the small 23 bit in production. A couple of months ago, as we hit 60%, we took the decision to actually restart more capacity so we can supply 70 of the 180 megalitres per day by about middle of next year. And again, that will totally offset all the power station demand that we're seeing out of the dam. So that's been the next phase, and we're currently talking with government about what the next part of that recommissioning is as we move towards further declining levels. The ultimate purpose of the Western Corridor scheme is around supplying water into Ivanhoe Dam to augment drinking water. Yes.
I can't recall what you said the consumption for the power station was, but I think you mentioned 20% of the entire SEQ.
Sorry, no. The Western Corridor Recycled Water Scheme's capacity is 20%.
Thank you.
The power stations, that would be taking more like 5%.
5% of SEQ demand?
Yeah.
So why is it not using the recycled water all the time?
And that's the direction we're moving into now.
Right.
So it's a very expensive asset to run and maintain, and now that we're in the drought situation, that's what we're partially doing now, and we'll have that completely in hand this time next year.
And one further, where does that recycled water come from? What's the origin?
So that is drawn from, I think there's about 5 or 6 wastewater treatment plants that are owned by urban utilities. So one's around Ipswich, Gibson Island and Bundamba. So it's most of Brisbane and Ipswich's wastewater. They treat it to the standard required for them to discharge it. We then have 3 advanced water treatment plants using world-class technology that actually turns that water into drinking water quality standard water, and that's the standard of water that would be put into Ivanhoe Dam, mixed up with dam water and then retreated. So it's a very extensive treatment process to deal with that wastewater.
So it's treated to the highest quality and then used to cool the power station? Or is it mixed?
Yes, that's right.
Right.
And we do that because we can't, it's eventually part of the drinking water supply. We have to make sure that the integrity of the whole scheme is kept in place so that it's always producing water of that highest quality standard. We don't have any residual or issues around having produced a lower quality standard. What do we do then to go to the highest quality standard? Obviously we have very extended drought conditions and we get a drought that's worse than the Millennium Drought. There is planning around what to do then, and we're currently looking at contingency options should we get to these sort of 25% type levels in the next couple of years, and that's work underway, but that's certainly part of our planning and part of our response.
Before you go off, if you go back to that slide with the contingency, so the city's recycled water will ultimately get discharged out to sea via the pipeline that we're putting there. When you reach that 25% mark, would it be a state government decision in regards to the repurposing of that type of resource?
No, that would be something in terms of the contingency measures we're looking at, your recycled water schemes aren't part of what we're looking at. It's more things like using Warralong Dam better, for example, which is an existing source. But any of these measures would be done through, if we required your help, it would be done through from our point of view, through a process of discussion and negotiation. Okay. But I would fair to say that our drought contingency focus isn't on the Gold Coast in terms of what we need to do. It's elsewhere.
Thank you.
So what we're currently doing, and this really goes back to the past plan, optimising that grid. So not only are we moving water from the Gold Coast using the desal plant to offset that demand centrally, but also transporting water from the Sunshine Coast south. So it's really to support the lower dam levels. That's in contrast to what happened 4 or 5 years ago when Sunshine Coast dams were actually in a lot of trouble, and we reversed that flow, and we put as much water as we could into the Sunshine Coast to support those dams up there. So it works both ways, right? And it will always work that way. But at the moment, the problem we've got is about supporting the central system. That will change over time. It could change over time, and it can change in the next drought as well. I think I've covered off those other points, and we've had the water saving campaign, as I mentioned before. So it's been a busy year. That's fair to say. Looking forward, what we're looking to do is really build up knowledge and understanding across the whole region around the drought situation that we're in, and the importance of water more generally, because this is going to, if the drought continues, this is a conversation that we need to escalate with the community more broadly. I think one of the findings we had out of our most recent research, so we do annual research across the region about attitudes and insights, people how to think about water and drought response and water planning. It was a bit alarming to us to see that only 25% of the population in South East Queensland thought we were in a drought, and 61% didn't. And I guess, not unsurprisingly, in some areas where you look outside and there's a green footpath and whatnot. So our focus over the next few months is really just to build that knowledge and understanding to say, we are as a region, there's a drought problem here that we need to start to talk about and work through, and using various different channels to have that conversation and talk about the plan that we have going forward as well. So and that will lead into and support, for example, discussions that we'll need to start having about when we need to have restrictions, which, as per the forecast we showed, that could be as early as December. So that helps that conversation about the need for restrictions.
So is it intended that restrictions would apply universally across the region? Because in the past we had experiences where Gold Coast was in odds and evens sort of thing, and other cities were just gleefully spraying water without control. But is it intended that it be?
Absolutely, because we manage water supply regionally. It has to be a regional response, and even though we might have full dams in one part of the world, actually preserving the supply in that dam is important because of how we can move water around the grid. So that's entirely our approach, is to have a regional response. Okay, if there's no further questions, there's a lot of detail on that slide, but I think the main thing is just to say we want to have that conversation around water security. I might hand over to Carly.
Thank you, Ross. Good morning, councillors. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview this morning of how we're taking that information that's coming out of SEQ Water and turning it into a localised campaign that's palatable for our community here on the Gold Coast. So you might be familiar with this creative that we've had in market probably now for about 18 months to 2 years. In developing this campaign, we took into consideration the comprehensive millennium drought messaging that a large portion of our residents are already familiar with, and identified that there could be the questions asked if we just simply rehash that message when the time comes, asking you to save water and this is how you do it. Yes, we know that, but what are you doing, City of Gold Coast? So in developing our campaign, we identified that we don't only need to tell or ask the community to help us in Save Water, but ensure they understand what this City of Gold Coast is doing to play our part. So that included promoting what we're doing to ensure efficient water use, which has included the expansion of the recycled water network and the use of that alternative water source for business and industry, delivering smart meters to our non-residential customers and providing an online portal to monitor water use and address potential leaks in real time, and internal process changes that we've made to rapidly respond to water leaks on city land. So that's how the Let's Save Water Together campaign came to fruition. And it supports SEQ Water's messaging in that we're all in this together, we're one region, one water supply, and everyone and every drop counts. This campaign is not a drought campaign. We have purposely turned it into a sustainability campaign so we can have an always-on approach regardless of what's happening in terms of water security. So when water supply is in abundance, we're in the market reminding the importance of sustaining that water supply because we are part of the water grid and that water can be sent north to our northern neighbours where it may be needed more. And as our combined storage water levels fall, our messaging can become more urgent without having to redesign the creative, and we simply increase media buy to expand the visual aspects around the city. So what you've seen so far over the last year or two is street pole banners across the city. We've had flyers in tourism publications. We've got van wraps on our first responder vehicles that attend to those water leaks. We've wrapped our sewage pump station assets. We have quarterly articles in the community news, which is the water bill insert, as well as artwork and messaging on bill shells and the envelope that it goes in. We've got social media campaigns that are refreshed quarterly and web banners. So we're now in the position where we do need to increase the messaging as we head towards a possible announcement of drought and water restrictions later this year. So we're building on the Let's Save Water Together campaign to include more education to increase water literacy around where our water comes from, the fact that we are one region, one water supply, and the water can be moved around the water grid to where it's needed most. Recycled water is a big topic for us here on the Gold Coast. What is it? How can it be used? How are we assisting industry with this climate resilient and cost-effective option, and the fact that we're expanding that network to reach more of our non-residential customers? We aim to increase water literacy to ensure there is a level of understanding around the water grid, and that when water restrictions are possibly announced, the city has done everything possible to encourage the use of recycled water for irrigation and slow down the use of the drinking water supply. So improving water literacy through digital assets, I'm just giving you a snapshot of a data use graphic that we've got on the website. So the graphic on the far left there is just a screenshot of what is live now on the My Water page. And that's pulling data to allow us to inform residents of how we're tracking in terms of water use per person per day. So we don't currently have a target that we have to meet at the moment, but it's important to start that conversation around, well, what is typical of our water use on the Gold Coast? What is 140 litres per person per day look like, and how are we over that? What was our best result? So that's only just gone live in the last week or so, and we're still working on a few tweaks with that, and that will form part of our education messaging and it'll be a really important tool to use. The graphic in the middle there is a tool that we've built that's sitting in the background waiting for water restrictions to be announced. So that's when the target 140 litre per person per day message will come in right across southeast Queensland. So we'll be able to use that tool to show how we're tracking each week. That figure is updated, and are we meeting target? How far over are we? And depending on how far over we are, specific water saving tips will pop up to support the resident to make a slight change in behaviour in the home to simply bring that level down. So that example I've got in the middle there is just over 20 litres over per person per day. So a couple of tips will pop up: have a shorter shower, wash with a full load, use a trigger nozzle hose in the garden. If we start getting way over 40 litres, 50 litres per person per day, more tips will come up and they'll be refreshed quite frequently. The graphic on the right-hand side is where we want to go and what we're currently scoping, and that's moving just from a water use graphic into what we're calling an environmental dashboard. So that's an example of what the city of Oberlin has done in the US, I believe they are. And by creating something similar, we'll enable the community to have easy access to information they require to make more sustainable choices and give a holistic view of sustainability in their local neighbourhood right here on the Gold Coast. So the information we're looking at including will be weekly water use, obviously, waste generation, renewable energy generation. That tool will form part of our communications and education to the community, but it will be a really important platform that will then link to all of our educational pages right across the website, highlighting the sustainable actions that we're taking and what we're asking the community to take. Any questions?
Councillor Hamill.
Madam Chair, it wasn't a question of Carly, but maybe back instead. I was wondering if you knew how much water we lose from our dams just in natural absorption each day, or maybe in a week or a month?
Yeah, good question. It's significant. So it's in terms of when we have a hot evaporation day, we can lose as much, if not more, through evaporation as from demand. So it has a big impact, certainly, during summer and when it's hot, yeah.
So I know there's been advances all around the world and the technology's changing all the time, but are we likely to see any time in the not too distant future where we would see some of our smaller dams or reservoirs have covers over them or different systems put in place to reduce that evaporation?
It's a technology that we're always looking at, and it's certainly on our radar. There are some issues and risks with it, particularly if you then have a flood. But it's certainly on our radar in terms of what we think about. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Through the Chair, it was noted before that there's a perception in tourist cities that there's a high use by visitors. Do you know whether there's validity to that? And if there is, what is that impact? I mean, it occurs like there would be. I know that for myself, my behaviour changes when I go on a holiday. And there's a sense so I'm just curious about that impact. I mean, depending on what figures you're looking at, we might be looking at 10 million visitors a year who this isn't really a high priority for them.
Look, absolutely. We work on about 11 million visitors to the city a year. And you're absolutely right. In general, they're less concerned about water use and more concerned about having a good time and relaxing and enjoying. Very hard to get good data on what does that mean. We obviously account for it in our planning, in visitor nights and occupancy of motels, etc., for our network modelling and network and demand planning. But very difficult in the sense that, yes, we can absolutely look at motels and accommodation facilities, but obviously we get a number of visitors just come down for the weekend and stay with friends or do a range of things. So do they have an impact? Absolutely, absolutely. Can that be easily and really accurately separated from the residential population? Less easy to do. We do have specific campaigns, and we have had in the past targeting accommodation facilities, and that includes, just as you would normally see, bench cards that say, please conserve our water. Stickers on mirrors, the regular, don't put out your towels for washing every day, please, if you're able to hang them up again and use them again. So we've done those campaigns in the past, and generally we get, I think, quite good support from the sector and the tourism industry in those programs.
Yeah, we certainly do, and that'll be a segment that we'll focus on as we near our inch closer to water restrictions, because we'll have that tourism type message right through southeast Queensland. So at the moment there's a risk of that message being a little bit lost with the visitors coming here when there's not loud and proud drought messaging type across the city. Exactly, but as we inch towards those water restrictions, then the messaging gets provided back to the hotel and accommodation providers. And I did work on the Millennium Drought campaign, and the accommodation providers were crying out for that information. They were really supportive. So yeah.
Can I just add to that too, because I managed a resort in Coolangatta for a lot of years, and I think that the accommodation houses for tourism were probably the ones that really led the way in putting water-saving devices on all taps, showers, getting rid of cooling towers. I know at Beach House we had a massive cooling tower that used masses of water. We actually decreased our water consumption by half, by 50%. And we were made to, we had to do that, but that was across the board. So I think the tourism industry actually has led the way as far as making sure that they're using as least water as possible. Councillor Hamill.
Madam Chair, through you to the Director. So appreciating in the holiday precinct to start with, so in our hotels and accommodation settings, have we ever got to a point where in the design of those buildings we're connecting them to recycled water to go through the toilets, or we're having them put in tanks that collect some grey water so they can irrigate their own sites, not using tap water? Like, have we got to that point yet?
Absolutely. The outstanding development is the Star Casino development. They take recycled water, they treat it, and they reticulate it through their buildings and the buildings that they're constructing for toilet flushing. So they are by far the most, as I said, engaged and active in that area. Clearly our recycled water network is only available to some areas and some localities. In terms of grey water reuse or rainwater harvesting systems, that's generally a decision by the developer themselves. We can't mandate that, and in the past the city did have requirements for installation of rainwater tanks on residential properties, but there are no mandatory directions in grey water or rainwater use for any establishments at this point in time.
So appreciate you can't mandate it. It would be something as a council that we could choose to look at city plan changes in the future as another addition to building design in the city. I'm wondering, sorry, Chair.
And Councillor Hamill, I think there's a lot of smaller accommodation houses that have actually they've got their own water tanks. They use their water for their landscape irrigation. That's been happening for years.
Yeah, and I knew of examples of it. I knew the Star was kind of the leading example of it, but they're kind of a drop in the ocean compared to the overall usage. It has to be a plan that over the next couple of decades you'd like to see the vast majority compared to the minority connected to it. Chair, through you to the Director again, and the recycled water tends to be looked at in terms of going through toilet systems. Like, do we understand? I'm thinking of Yatala, for example. So there had been attempts in the past to look at taking recycled water. It is in parts of Yatala, but that was for actual use. So to go through a manufacturing process. But in big employment areas like that, does it not stack up that if all those buildings were connected to recycled waters for their toilet systems, does that lead to a cost benefit? There's actually enough recycled water getting used, or is that not enough alone that in those areas if it's only going through toilet systems?
Look, generally, toilet systems aren't a large user of water, as you say. In the big scheme of things, the biggest water use by far is external water use, irrigation. Even on residential properties, historically. Nowadays, as over time, densification has led to smaller lots, less green areas, privately. So we've actually seen that's contributed to a lot of the reduction in water use that we've seen. Similarly, during the Millennium Drought and since, just our normal water use devices have improved in their efficiency. Back when we were kids, you only had a single flush 11-litre toilet. Now I don't think you can buy anything other than a 3 to 6 litre flush toilet. So all of those things contribute to those improvements. But generally, to retrofit a system that would only supply, for example, toilet flushing in the Yatala area would be enormously expensive compared with the savings that would be achieved. That's where we're targeting with our recycled water. And for example, to go back when we had the Class A plus system, we had 5,000 customers, residential customers who used 5% of the recycled water in the city. We had 50 large customers who used 95% of recycled water in the city. So it's that sort of balance. So our target is always the large users and replacing large uses of potable water.
Madam Chair, final question, and I don't have a map in front of me showing our current recycled water network, but how far south does it go at the moment? So beyond the Star, it may be for easy context?
In south?
Yeah, to head.
We got recycled water right the way down to Coolangatta. Betty Diamond Sports Complex, I think, is the southernmost, which is right next to the airport.
And so the main line that feeds most of that, where would it run in proximity to the main high-rise strip in the heavy dense area?
Look, most of them are look, it varies. The southern part is mostly pretty much along the M1. The northern part, it comes closer to the coast.
So that was my understanding. It was near the M1. So was there any investigation in looking at while light rail works we're going to continue towards the border of having a main line head underneath the light rail network and take advantage of that at the same time, so we had a main line closer to the ocean in the southern end?
Look, we have, as you know, we've just awarded what we call stage 1 of the recycled water network expansion project. That's currently just starting construction up near the Carrara Sporting Complex. That project has another 5 stages worth 100 million, which go across the whole of the city and target the high water users that we can across the city. But there's always other opportunities depending on what developments occur and to be honest, what the city wants to do in terms of promoting this resource.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I take that as a no then. So we're not putting we're not putting in the same way that when we were doing the first stage of light rail, we put in services for the future and capacity for the future. There's no purple pipeline going underneath the light rail network to make sure there's a main line there for the future.
No, not down the stage 3. We are putting in a large water main, but we're not putting in a recycled water main.
So, and we don't think that was a missed opportunity, at least so we're sitting there for the future. If this council or a future council decided to connect into it, it doesn't warrant the expenditure.
No, because essentially you can't supply any existing property because the properties aren't plumbed for dual reticulation.
So what happens in 30 years' time when those high rises get knocked down and new ones get built? We still can't supply them then.
Well, to be honest, the real answer is the Western Corridor scheme. If we are in that sort of situation where we need recycled water to all users, you use your current water reticulation network. It just doesn't stack up. You're investing in a completely new duplication of a network. That's billions of dollars.
I'm happy to leave it there, Chair.
Any other questions? Thanks, Carly. Thanks, Ross.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Councillor McDonald, sorry. Don't go anywhere.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Actually, this sitting here listening to this, it sounds like a rerun of discussions we held 20 years ago. Ross, just a question to you. Now, around about 2000, there was discussion about a desal plant in Brisbane. What happened with any future desal in Brisbane? What's happened there?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, look, I'm not personally familiar with that decision back in or that investigation back in 2020. Certainly, we look in terms of long-term water sources. We're happy to look at all options. I think the desal location is one of the constraining factors there is having something that's close to large networks, being able there's environmental factors as well. So it may have been ruled out on that basis, but it certainly hasn't emerged towards the the top of the pile in terms of long-term options that we're currently looking at.
Also, back I think it was 2005 when we came out of the worst drought in history. Gold Coast City Council's always been very good and probably at the forefront of doing education in a drought. And at that time, for those that remember, we had the beach showers that we had to turn off, and there was a lot of messaging around, and we all worked together through industry, residential, commercial. And we found that it was very successful, and I think it was Councillor Young just mentioned it before about the odds and evens, and I have raised this before. It was an ongoing education program, and I can't understand why this hasn't been put in place as an ongoing education program, because it is education that reminds people that we may have had a drought 20 years ago, but we're always going to have another drought. So can you just explain why that hasn't been an ongoing education program for that odds and evens?
There may not have been focused on odds and evens, but there's certainly been education programs, not only from ourselves, but across other councils as well, around water savings and the importance of water security. So we, for example, run a school education program and have done that for some years now to build up knowledge and literacy amongst not only children at school, but they take that home as well. And we've run community events and other information and education processes to build that level of knowledge and awareness of the need for water security.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair, if I could just add to that. If we hit 50% later this year, certainly in that first round of proposed restrictions across the region, odds and evens watering is part of that package. at that point in time. I think post the Millennium Drought, there was significant debate about, people sort of call them permanent water restrictions, like things like odds and evens watering, to maintain and embed good behaviours and just ensuring people, continuously use water wisely and efficiently, because that's what will sustain you through bad periods, is if you're sustainable and use water efficiently during the good periods. I have no doubt that if we go into drought again, and significant drought, that discussion about permanent water restrictions or permanent water saving behaviours will occur again.
And anybody who hasn't had a tour of the desal plan, I suggest that, when you get the opportunity to do so, because it's really, really interesting, and certainly opened my eyes up. I've been twice now, because Gold Coast Open House actually usually has it on their itinerary, where people can have tours, and it's been really, really insightful. Councillor Young.
Chair, I wonder if the Water Commission is looking at long-range forecasts for the summer period and what that might look like?
We certainly do, and we largely take our cues off the BOM, the Bureau of Meteorology data. Now they're talking about a wet spring and probably a wetter than average summer. So, however, what that means is what we get in terms of getting real inflows into dams. You need a week of heavy rain, and the averages in spring really don't give you that. And if you just get a little bit more than the average spread out across the season, it doesn't do much. So we certainly look at that, and it's something we keep an eye on. But it's certainly you kind of have to. It's uncertain, right? Because of the weather, we have to factor that into our planning. But again, recognising that weather's always uncertain.
Yeah.
To Madam Chair, again, if I could add to that, I think we sometimes forget the other side of the coin, which is more certain, is that while the rainfall patterns are always up to the weather gods, all of the projections are that there will absolutely be an increase in our median and higher temperatures. And that will absolutely have an impact on two things. One is, as Councillor Hamill said before, our water losses just through evaporation in our storages. But also when we have obviously higher temperatures and longer periods of higher temperatures, people's water use increases significantly, and the water use that they want to use to keep their garden going and even just to keep cool in the middle of summer increases significantly. So it's a double whammy. We're getting hit from both sides. The uncertainty in the rainfall patterns, and obviously, but the more significant impact is the absolute drying and the increase in temperatures, which again increases the soil moisture deficit, which reduces the runoff when you get any rain. So, as Ross said, we're absolutely certain there will be impacts. We're just not sure how significant those impacts are.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Young.
One last thing I wanted to ask about the desal plant, which obviously consumes an enormous amount of electricity, and some would say that that contributes to climate change, and that contributes to our demand for water, and that contributes to our demand or reliance upon desalination plants. So is the desal plant using renewable energy?
No, it's not, but we have recently put in place commitments around, getting towards, as a business, getting towards zero net emissions, and
good.
And that'll obviously be part of that journey, because, as you say, I think we need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, we have a closed item, but I'm just wondering, is there any questions for that item? Do we need to go into closed?
No questions, Madam Chair, but I've got a conflict to declare.
Oh, okay then. All right. Have you given that to the minutes secretary?
No, I have a conflict for JJ Richards, but I think it may be one that left me in the room, because we've now reached a point in this contract negotiation stuff, I'll be exiting the room from now on whenever it rears its head.
All right, so can we bring that conflict up? And you're going to leave the room, Councillor Hamill?
I think just for consistency, it might be a meeting or two early still, but I think just for consistency, I'll start doing it from now since we're getting closer to it going to market.
I think that's very prudent.
It's nice how you boys are first.
The Maroons.
That's good chairmanship, yeah.
What can one say?
The conflict that's being disclosed, we're only resolving an invitation to tender, is that?
That's correct.
So just so we're very clear, this is a closed item and we're currently...
This is a closed item. We're currently in open session. The declaration has been made, but having read the report, that entity that was mentioned by Councillor Hamill is not mentioned in the report at all.
No.
Great. I just want to be very clear, because what's going to happen is we're going to potentially move to close and have questions, and that might be discussed. But to me, I read that report, and that entity is not mentioned in the report. We're not at that stage at all, such that we're just resolving.
No, but Councillor Hamill has made the decision.
The contracting plan.
Yeah, but Councillor Hamill has made the decision that he wants to do a declaration from here on in and leave the room.
Correct. And it is no secret that the first process in executing a contract plan is inviting people to tender. Is that correct? And we haven't actually done that invitation yet, have we? That's not a secret either. That's just the process.
That's right.
That's correct.
Just, Madam Chair, and just to give Councillor Tozer a little bit of context on it, it's that I fully expect, and it would be reasonable that if you go into close and there's going to be discussions had between councillors and officers on what may or may not be in a contract or what inclusions you may or may not want in a contract, and that just puts me in a position I'm not going to put myself in.
No,
I understand. Just want to make sure that there isn't any confusion from people who are watching about what might or might not be in the confidential report.
Okay.
Nobody's watching.
This is an
Can we just go to
committee.
the actual...
I think everyone will be watching.
Can we actually go up to the actual conflict? Yeah, that's okay. And Councillor Hammer, you're choosing to leave the room.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. No, you're going to leave the room, so... Well, you don't know. We may go into closed and we may debate this, or... Okay, committee. So is there any questions? Do we need to go into closed, or would someone like to...
I'm happy to.
Yeah, I'm happy to move it.
It seems quite straightforward.
Yeah, it does. I'm happy to move it, and Councillor Tozer, you're happy to second it?
Yes.
All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. We can invite Councillor Hamill back in. We just got one more presentation. Any general business? We might call on if there's any general business first before we do the presentation. No?
In the conversations we had with SEQ Water, has there been any movement at all on the conversation about compulsory water tanks in homes in order to contribute to this water storage capability of the city?
That's a decision for council. That has nothing to do with SEQ Water.
And it doesn't form any part of any water strategy that we might have?
No.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
Okay. All right, we're going to just have a presentation from Rod on progress of the solid waste strategy.
Sorry, Councillor, we were going to cancel that just for today.
Okay, all right.
Rod had to go to another meeting, so
because he was here
but
earlier.
he is here now. But we thought we'd hold that off to the next meeting.
Okay. Any general business? No? Declare the meeting closed at